whatever time you get this. It'll be Thursday morning, so I guess I can say good morning now. All right, welcome to episode 25 of Four Mortal Coils. I am the fourth coil. Bray is the second coil. Stevens, I'm not sure. And we're here today to discuss a new topic. Your third coil? Okay, there we go. The first coil is the listener, then. We'll do that.
Yep.
Yep. All right, so this topic is one that's... well, first off, how do you get started on something like this? This particular topic is really important to me. It is. Does morality require a doctrine? Do you need some sort of doctrinal structure to have a consistent, solid morality? Now, I chose this topic for a very particular reason, one that has to do with this one particular happening. A famous African, I suppose you could call her a philosopher or a thinker, analyst named Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Very popular, especially during the 2010s, very popular, who was very famous for coming out of a society, a very Islamic society, and then essentially becoming the antithesis of that Islamic society, and becoming a proponent of atheism, the sort of new atheism that you see with the Four Horsemen, I suppose. She, you could almost call her like the fifth horse woman or something. She was very, very popular. And I remember one quote Christopher Hitchens had said, I hate that every single fucking episode. I don't mean to do that, but we keep. It always comes back to Christopher. Fuck. Well,
you know why, Trevor? Because he didn't live long enough to do anything stupid.
Right,
you know?
right.
You either die a hero or live.
I suppose, depending on the way this episode goes, you could say that's what happened to Ayaan Hirsi Ali and others. I suppose. This is the discussion. So let me catch it to the chase so the listener knows what I'm talking about. So Ayaan Hirsi Ali was a very famous proponent of atheism. Christopher Hitchens had said that she was the most important thinker to ever have come out of Africa. And this includes like Augustine of St. Augustine of Hippo and all those people. Like, you can kind of tell what kind of person he was into, Christopher Hitchens. But Ayaan Hirsi Ali comes out, writes many things, is quite famous, quite popular. And she travels around the world just giving lectures and seminars. And she's very, very famous in that regard about disengaging yourself from the doctrine that you're born from. And extremely well-spoken. And all in all, just an incredible person. That something really interesting happened last year, 2023. She came out and announced that she converted to Christianity. As of right now, she is a Christian in the year 2024, the year of our Lord. And that's quite interesting. Specifically, her reasoning. It's somewhat similar to what you might see with Jordan Peterson. I'm sure most people listening to this know more about Jordan Peterson than they do Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I think he's overall more known. But a philosophy of sort of I'm innovating their perspective, the realization that you need some sort of moral structure in which to have a civilization. That's essentially the argument they're in. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali and others, from our perspective, from like a letting go of religion perspective, then looked into the barrel of all of the evil of this world and the most terrible calamities to have happened in just the 20th century. Looked into it and then surmised that you need some sort of dogma, it seems, some sort of moral structure, scaffolding to which you can encounter the reality. And that's what happened to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and that's essentially what the discussion is. So with that, I'd love to open the table a little bit. Bray, you look like you had something to say there, so I think you should go first.
Bray and I are frothing at the mouth.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sure, Bray, please.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. There's much that can be said, and I remember reading about this myself. Although whenever you posed the question, I can't believe I wasn't thinking of it immediately. So I'm glad that you brought all of that up. Stephen, I wish too, before I get started, that we had a better connection, because you are a grain of pixels to me, and lagging behind. But obviously that'll all seem together at the end, but I just wish I could be seeing your reactions in real time.
Yes.
Because I know you probably
will
have
hear my
similar.
voice.
Right?
Promise.
Yes, I will. It shall be known. But yeah, so honestly, listening to this and even reading about this at the time, because this was very recent, it reminds me of the same kind of people who are like teetering on the fence, or they've been an atheist for a while, and they'll say something like, well, now I just can't reconcile the fact that there's no cosmic justice or something. And what I mean by that is they'll see, or these are the people who the death penalty is not enough for, or that they believe that well, Hitler needs to be burning in hell somewhere, and so they're a Christian because they need to believe in some sort of cosmic justice. And I feel it's in the same vein as sort of Ali's position, in that, well, we've got to have something that people can abide by or look to or cling to in order to be good people. And I think that's just absurd. I think it's a weak position to hold, and I think that it's just faltering, and there's likely other factors associated with a reason for conversion. You don't, in my opinion, convert to a religion entirely just due to the moral, the doctrinal
The fact that it's
framework.
useful. I think that's
right.
that's what really she careens into it with. It's useful. She sees what is at odds. Like, she speaks on this very directly. I can't quote her directly on this. I'm afraid I don't remember, but she speaks very directly as to there being other forms of philosophical structure, other doctrines out there that are far more dangerous than Christianity. That's the central thrust of her argument. Now, those of us grown up in Christian households might have a different perspective on that, but
sure.
that's the perspective of someone who was born essentially in the Muslim Brotherhood or raised around it. She felt that she would rather be a Christian than let insert other philosophies that she dislikes more supplant what presently is within what you might call Western civilization. But to be honest, it's civilization. That's what we're speaking of. It's all of it. It's quite global. We're speaking of all of it right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, then to me, that's just somebody who doesn't believe that. It sounds like to me somebody who has very little faith, not to be, pun intended.
That's funny.
Very little faith in their fellow human beings.
Well, so,
and
real quick, I'd like to jump in
ahead.
on that actually, real quick. Thank you, listener, for joining us again. First time I'm speaking at least a little at length. We're happy you're back. I literally just wrote down on my little sticky notes here. Can you choose a doctrine? I mean, my goodness. One doctrine or the other is the word of God, right? And so I really like the direction Bray went there. Like, of course there's no faith involved. I'm sorry, but you can't just choose to eventually say, oh, well, I'm a Muslim or I'm a Christian, whereas you were an atheist and then claim that your faith has been like emboldened or something like that. There will always be lingering questions in these people's heads. I mean, we're not foolish, and we know that they're trying to struggle with this. Honestly, a cognitive dissonance, believing a contradictory thing. But like the direction she's taking it from, and I'm not trying to strawman her position. I'm not trying to make a position about her that's false and then argue against that one. All right, I'm trying to stick to what I've seen, and you don't just migrate to Christianity because of its utilitarian aspect. That's absurd. So it leads you to ask the very logical question: can you just choose one religion or the other? And if you can choose any religion you like, then none of them can be the final word of God. None of them can be correct. None of them can be false either. They're unfalsifiable, as a matter of fact.
So yes,
it's a sticky
So-
situation.
very much so. So point well taken. One thought I have about this particular topic that I want to ask both of you on this is a problem of I guess you could say the dogma of this dogma. How do you phrase this? So last episode, if anyone, for those of you who had seen it, about logical fallacies, it's one of my more favorite ones. You should definitely give it a listen if you're interested about learning about, like, circular reasoning and all that. One thing we talk about is the competition of ideology. How you'll have like a particular situation, such as like Black Lives Matter protests happening for a time, and then you have people on the right and the left trying to force their interpretation over the overall structure of what is happening. There are many things happening in this world all at once, and then there's sort of a forceful push as to how it is interpreted. It's a bit like Napoleon, like history is decided by the victors, that sort of thing. There's a sort of overall narrative or fighting between narratives to decide what is the actual narrative. Like, for example, if you grew up in the I keep on doing this. Like, I keep on mentioning the Abbasid Third Caliphate. I don't know why I keep doing that, but I'll do it again. If you exist within that place, your ideology, your philosophy is the eventual growth of Islam to take the entire world. And at that point, it had been doing so quite successfully in both directions, both towards Persia and then towards Europe. It was doing quite well. If you that's the narrative at which you engage reality from. And the same thing can be said about the narrative that exists, let's say, in like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. The eventual goal of the Soviet Union is to eventually have communism envelop the entire world. And you could say, if I'm trying to be like more meta about my own narrative, to understand my own narrative, you could almost say that the narrative that you and I have, you and I being Stephen, Bray, and I can only assume, is this idea of science freeing and we existing to go be the passive observers of the universe and stretching out and learning what there is to learn strictly because it is fun to do so and going out amongst the stars. That's another narrative. It's another narrative. And I think what Ayaan Hirsi Ali is doing, I think the reason why she decided to choose a narrative, and I agree that it's a little strange to choose something that's supposed to be a revelation, is she believes that the overall narrative that I just surmised for you, the one that was brought with the Four Horsemen and whatever else, is overall a weak narrative and leaves gaps and openings for nihilism and extreme suffering and pain, things that can be circumvented if you have a stronger, more psychologically tenable ideology, a stronger narrative. And it's through that she decides to be a Christian. She believes that the overarching philosophy of Christianity is overall stronger and more immune to the mannerisms of things such as Islam or communism or this or that or whatever things that she fears. I can't perfectly innovate her position, but I am trying to understand the person who does these sort of things.
Real quick, I can't possibly let that pass, right?
Please,
so
go on.
So what I mean to say is, and first I'll begin with a question. I'm assuming an answer. Okay, are you saying that she believes that Christianity is a psychological help? It like it helps one's psychology, or are you, Trevor, saying that?
I can never know. I can only tell you that that's the way that I understand the position.
I can know. I don't have to think about it. My entire family has been ruined by religion, and my story is not uncommon. The tenets of Christianity are untenable. That they're not okay or right or anything for that matter. They're fake and flawed and false. The Bible advocates, like I said on the Discord the other day, it advocates for the conquer of civilization and its conquest. So it's control. It's an enemy to civilization. It's not a help. And I've never spoken to an atheist who regretted it. I mean, in person. Of course, we can pull up an example. We're talking about an example right now, but and once again, the plural of anecdote is not evidence. but I've never spoken to someone who's given up this bullshit and said, I regret it.
So I have one story for you there that might bulwark it a little bit, just so that we can better encounter it. I was talking with a family member the other day, a family member who was raised very Christian and in that non-denominational sort, where it's where it's just I'm a Christian, and he always had been that way. We were discussing another family member. I won't get into who, but
Real quick,
this
we refer to those as milk toast or backslid if you prefer the deep south.
But yes. So this other family member who has very serious anxiety and dread. That sort of I suppose you could call it like an existential fear. Like a fear and trembling, that sort of thing. If you want to quote Kierkegaard on that, a deep residual fear of what life is and his place within it. And he's always had this, and it's been very serious. And so have I. I have been in the same way. And one thing that's plural is common to the two of us is neither one of us are Christians. And this other family member that was raised and was always very Christian turned to me and goes, "Well, I can't really understand why he's so anxious, like where all that anxiety came from." And to me, the way that I encounter that, and just like what Stephen said a second ago, this isn't evidence; it's just an antidote. The way that I encounter that is to say that, of course, you didn't have anxiety. Of course, you didn't have this fear and trembling to a degree that this person insert here has it. You have quite a profound doctrine to which you can encounter it. You have a very easy way of encountering this sort of thing. The only problem is, and I'm sure both of y'all can sympathize with what I'm about to say, the only problem with this doctrine that does in fact abate for some people out there their fear, their anxiety, their trembling, and the encroaching feeling of nothingness and nihilism. While it does help people deal with these problems, the fundamental issue is that it's not true. If it's not true, right. You have built Ayan Hirsi Ali, the way I see it, she has built a castle, a large, powerful castle in the sand. And into the sand it'll go as the dust. It'll fall into itself as it always was going to. I'm imagining in my mind, at the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, there's this really famous moment where Krishna, who's speaking to this young man, Arjuna, before a battle. Krishna is an embodiment of God. And there's this moment where he does something that's very interesting. He outstretches his hands, his arms, like this, outward. And he goes, it's translated in Oppenheimer, it's in that movie, he goes, "I am become death." That's not the greatest translation. A better translation would be, "I am time." And he opens up his arms when he says that. And there are 1,000,000 trillion battles and 1,000,000 trillion war elephants and men with spears lying mangled in the dirt, killing each other and dying. And Krishna goes, "I am time, and I will take away everything that you love, as I always have done." And that is sort of the way that I encounter Ayan Hirsi Ali. Time will take this away from you. You've built a sandcastle in the sand. It'll fall into itself. It's not true. It's not true. How could you hope to build a world on it? How could you hope to build a civilization upon it? You know in your heart. You already know. And that's essentially my fear about it. And basically the reason why I wanted to do this episode. And I wanted to see specifically what y'all think about that thought. And specifically what happens if you go, okay, well, it's not true. Well, what do we do now? Is it sufficient? What we now exist in, our narrative? What do we have?
Well, so I'm
hang on, and I'm gonna be typing really quick. I was just listening, so I'm trying to not lose the thoughts as I have them. You guys know I have severe ADHD, and so I whenever we do these podcasts, sometimes I have thoughts, and then they're like all like right here, and I'm like holding on to this one, that one's running away, and so
I used to count fingers whenever I had thoughts. I used to do that.
Really?
In philosophy clubs. Yeah, whenever people would argue at each other, there'd be like 10 people shouting out each other. I had something I really wanted to say about something, but I knew So, and then I had another thought at the same time. So I'd go like this, and then here's my second thought, and then here's my third thought, and I would hold them on my side so I could remember that I have three different thoughts, and I'd have to come up and like pick one.
Yeah.
Very difficult to do that. That's not something I can just do, but that is something I would try to do in these things.
Yeah.
So
comment while
my
Gray's
gut.
getting ready. Like I'm just happy.
Yeah, go ahead,
that
because
we're-
I'm still.
Yeah, you're good. I'm just happy that we're moving to the generalized question. Like, does morality require a doctrinal idea? Does it require a dogma? And so on.
So my initial reaction, of course, whenever you're talking about this, is to bring up the Matrix and stories like it, and how comfortable people can be living in a world that's actually not reality, so to speak. And this goes back to this sort of question that I end up asking people all the time, especially when talking about Christianity, not necessarily just about moral doctrine, but it's like, what's more important to you, what's true or what makes you feel good? And that's essentially the same thing as just like what Morpheus asked Neo, is like, hey, do you want to know what's true or do you want to just feel good? That's the question that he was basically asked whenever presented with the pills. And it reminded me of a video I was watching just a few days ago. I was watching a great philosopher on YouTube. Her name is Abigail Thorne. And she was talking about, the video is titled I read the most misunderstood philosopher in the world. And she's talking about Judith Butler. And of course, we've talked about Judith Butler on the podcast before. They're a professor at Berkeley, I believe, still.
Mhm.
And Judith Butler, they wrote a book called Who's Afraid of Gender? And I ordered it just recently, and I've got it, and I can't wait to read it. But Abigail Thorne is talking about a term that Judith Butler uses in the book Who's Afraid of Gender, and it's called phantasm. And it reminded me of kind of the vein of what you're speaking about. And unfortunately, the New York Times is paywalled, so I can't actually get to this article that will explain exactly the context of this. But it's the way I wanted to kind of wrap this into the discussion is that if I'm not mistaken, phantasm is being used in the sense of I'm trying to remember what Abigail used as an example, sort of how people can be fed something like the whole gender or crisis or gender identity. We had the podcast episode about that. Like, what is the debate? They can be fed this narrative about that that presents one sort of position, and then this sort of concept of a phantasm happens inside their head, and it twists that sort of information that's being presented to, I could, this gender identity thing could be attacking me, or could try to do all of these different things that I don't want it to do. And over time, eventually that becomes, it is actually like coming for me. Like I'm under assault by this, my kids are going to be, brainwashed. Like, this is actually happening. Like, that is me probably absolutely butchering the explanation, but this is kind of what I think about in the terms of a lot of people who are religious fall into this camp, I think, of sort of creating this reality inside of their head where it's like necessary for them to believe these just weird positions that aren't actually the truth, just to fill these gaps, like you were talking about nihilism or sort of fear and trembling earlier. And I think that could be a similar thing with the Ali situation, is looking at, well, perhaps we're all presented with these struggles, these existential struggles or something, and we need some way to solve that. And for some reason, she decided that Christianity and Christian doctrine was the best way to go about doing that. And I just have to disagree. On one level, I think it's because if you could take Christian doctrine on a piece of paper and even improve one thing about it, would you not be obligated to follow the improved doctrine? And in that same vein, like if we're saying that a Christian doctrine can be improved, then it's obviously being improved within relation to something. Christian doctrine, according to Christians, is the foundation of that doctrine is not like necessarily what we would consider best for everyone or best, the ideal moral framework that we would want to live under, because it's not necessarily in everyone's best interest in reality. They may think it is because, God ordained it or whatever, but, the evidence would suggest otherwise. And, i.e., see the Crusades, see, all the crazy Protestant shit that was going on in colonial America, see any number of atrocities committed by any religion, but for Christianity in particular. And so that's why I wonder why Christianity? Why not take a look at something like if your concern is number one, ground zero, people just being well or being good people, but then number two, like fear and trembling or existential crisis or everything nothingness, we're rapidly approaching just not existing forever. Why would you cling to something that is just, first of all, not true, but also why not embrace something like secular humanism? Why not seek to educate people about what is, I don't know, like just the matter of the fact.
Sure. So to bulwark the argument a little bit, and I think, like Stephen said, I think we've detached somewhat from the Ayin Hersey Ali bit and just talked about it generally. To talk specifically about like why you would select Christianity over secular humanism, like what we have, is quite simply it is silent. It's very often silent and I think y'all can agree with this, that what atheism is it's not a philosophy. It's just the lack of these insert philosophies. It's the lack of Christianity. It's the lack of Islam. It's the lack of Hinduism. And there's a certain amount of silence to the narrative. That being said, it doesn't have an overarching narrative. There is no overarching symbolism that one can encounter reality from within the confines of secular humanism. Not one that I can think of.
False.
And therein lies the fundamental issue. Go ahead, please.
So like a lot of what we're missing here can be demonstrated really easily, right? Trevor, you just made the claim that secular humanism has no like what you might call grounding, or it might have no. You say it's silent, right? You're saying it's.
I would say specifically when I say yes, I would say when it says it has no grounding, I mean to say it has no not that per se, just that it has no way to confront you with your fears, with your anxiety, with your terror, with your feeling that everything is meaningless, that sort of thing. I mean that it has no ability to circumvent that.
We're on the same page then. I completely deny that. I completely disagree with that. The scientific pursuit is the way. You begin to understand what's really going on around you, and you connect with nature. It is a connection with nature.
So the fundamental issue here, the issue that I have with that, is that I agree with you that I would like to do those things. You and I would love to do those things. But that doesn't mean that they're grounded. You just listed things that you like to do. That's very different from what Christianity does and what Islam does and what Buddhism does. Or maybe not Buddhism. It depends on the way you look at it. But suffice to say, what they have is a structured reality to which you can then exist within their structure. I'm not saying it's good. Right. I'm not saying it's good. But what I am saying is it's blank space. And within that blank space, you yourself decided you would like to approach science. And that's quite strange for someone when they are young, 14, let's say, and they're not sure what to do with their life. And there's no structure. There's no branching arm that reaches out to them and tells them what to do with their life. They're just told to figure it out. They're told there are things that are fun to do, but it's reliant upon you. It's incumbent upon you. And I think that's the difference between Christianity and what you have with secular humanism. It's
Well,
negation. It's not
that's
optional.
what I'm trying to
Or
say
it
though,
is
is that
option.
in a study of psychology, we can encounter many things that just make human life bearable. Like, let's just go for that. Much less happy. Of course, by the way, dear listener, if you're in counseling, if you're in therapy, or if you're just a hobby level interest in psychology, it can help you tremendously understand yourself much better, by the way, than any doctrine. And that's what I'm trying to get at. I just watched Inside Out 2 with my baby niece and my sisters and my mother. And that is a narrative. That blank space that you're talking about, Trevor, you insert that narrative. That's all religion is a narrative. But
I completely agree.
But
Yes.
the movie's not telling you to kill your firstborn son, and
That's
it's
true.
not telling you to.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm not 100%. I'll have to take you on your word on that.
But you get what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't
Yes.
vilify a man who's willing to destroy his family for some perceived deity.
Here's the huge issue here, though. Here's the huge issue. It is there's a plurality now. That's different. That's very different from Christianity. What Christianity was not a narrative. It was the narrative. Like, the whole point. This is weird. This is an interesting historical point. The reason why we switch over from things such as scrolls
Trevor,
and reading literature in terms of scrolls over to books is that early Christians would want to switch between the Old Testament and New Testament as a way to bulwark New Testament philosophy and say, oh, see, it was written in earlier Old Testament. They'd be able to flip the book. And that was one of the reasons why you see a change in the way that literature was written. Why did I say that? I specifically am trying to say that there is now a plurality of narratives compared to the single structural mind of, okay, Christian world, you're in it. And instead, what we have are many different narratives to choose from. And that's quite different.
There's a very big gaping hole in your argument there. The Bible is not a single narrative. It's a lot of them, many of which contradict each other. And
I completely agree.
And that could be said about all the monotheisms. In other words, we start on that blank slate that you're talking about, and the Bible and the Quran and the Torah and all your other really popular religions have the charisma of continuity. They have this idea that because it's been with us a long time, it's trustworthy. But let's go ahead and get rid of that as well. Blank spot.
So when
blank spot. And then you have all of these myths. We have not changed in our religious views since the Greeks or anywhere else. Mary is practically a goddess. We have innumerable prophets that can be drawn upon. They're all myths, just like Heracles and anything else for that matter. Any other myth you can talk about. So I completely deny and refute the idea that these myths are somehow better than the movie I just watched.
Now, I'm not trying to say better or worse. I'm just trying to define. And I think you've made a mistake right there with the way that you define the narrative, because you're looking at it directly from your perspective. I think it would be good at this moment to innovate it from a Christian perspective. To a Christian, it is one narrative.
That's what I'm
there
trying
is
to
continuity.
Say,
that's my point. Well, that's the distinction.
Christian perspective. I was a Christian
from a Christian
for a long,
perspective.
long time.
Well, from a Christian perspective, it is all one overarching narrative. There is one God in three parts.
But they don't even talk about it that way. That's what I'm trying to say. Like as a Christian, you would go to Sunday school, hear one lesson on something else, right? You'd go to Sunday night school, and you would hear another moral lesson based in a completely different myth. Then you would go to Wednesday church and hear a completely different narrative. And
then you go to the other church on the other side of the street and do theirs, and they have.
But what I'm saying is, you need to look at it from a Christian perspective. It is one narrative. It is there is one God. Like, you're not looking at it and go, well, these are written by 10 different people with 10 different gods.
But most Christians are Catholic, and they have 3, and plus Mary.
But they don't see it that way. I'm speaking strictly from the Christian mythos, strictly from the Christian perspective.
Jump in here so I can try to clear up, so that if there's someone else who's as confused as I am right now, they can join me in this journey of figuring out where we are. So is the conflict here that, Trevor, you're saying that for the Christian perspective, they might say that they have the advantage or the better position because they appear to have a unified narrative, as opposed to the like logical not Christianity, which could be like, for example, an atheist that doesn't have like some overarching super narrative about life or existence or anything like that, and that makes Christians superior in the moral doctrine area in a roundabout way. Like, I'm trying to
Almost there. I wouldn't
okay.
quite. If I'm trying to understand it from Ayan Hirsi Ali's perspective, then I would say yes to what you just said. I'm not trying to
Right.
argue this. I'm trying to
Sure.
understand it and counter it. What I'm doing is steel manning here. So
Yeah.
that is essentially what's going on. That is the essential argument.
And I
that either
appreciate your
one of
steel
two
man.
possibilities. One of two possibilities. Either it's a whole bunch of sub narratives which are inferior to an overall overarching narrative, or that the overarching narrative of what we currently know as like liberal secular humanism is paltry and incapable of encountering other more unified narratives, or better narratives, let's say.
Then what this sounds like to me is a discussion which we already kind of got started on for a second, a discussion about the weight of something not being true but being comforting. And what that directly drives me to is something that, Trevor, you may be familiar with, is a story called San Manuel Bueno Martyr. And for those unfamiliar, it's a great little story about I believe he's a priest.
Yep.
Who is the local priest of this town. And he is like the foundation upon which everyone stands. It's kind of like the cornerstone, keeps everything held together in this little town. And he's a priest. Everybody comes to him for their woes and their troubles. However, this motherfucker does not believe any of the religious parts of his job, and only does the priestly things because it benefits the people of the town. That they believe that he is actually like a real priest, and that he does everything, but he doesn't actually believe that any of it is true or is actually producing any sort of, I guess, supernatural effects or anything. And the sort of central problem of the story is whether or not he decides to stay in this town and continue this job, because without him, it is assumed that everything would crumble and fall apart, and these people's well-being would immediately just and so that kind of seems like what we're dealing with, I guess, is like, should we really put up with falsity? Or is that a word, falsity?
Falsehood?
Falsehood,
Yeah, there we go. That's what I'm looking for.
Falsehood. There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to buy a noun. Anyway, should we really put up with falsehood just because it makes other people feel good?
So I would like to interject real quick there.
Please.
Very briefly, I prefer the Law and Order interpretation of that story. Same exact story, but the only reason why a Catholic father was talking to Elliot Stabler one time, Stabler goes, "Father, why do you do this job if you don't believe?" And he says, he's got a cigarette in hand, he goes, "I have no other marketable skills." That's what priesthood comes from. Not the Steelman version of that story you just talked about. It's not
not this
man. It's for just them. It's for just them. They get to have a very posh, floating on the top type of job. I was groomed to become one, I promise.
Yeah. But that's exactly what I'm talking about, is like, are we really meant to believe that somehow this is a superior form of moral doctrine? And really the moral part is kind of separate. We're really talking about the belief system as a whole, kind of right now, which encapsulates the moral doctrine. But are we really meant to believe and to act as if this is somehow superior just because a large number of people on the planet believe it and it comforts them? I've always, well, and I'm gonna sound like a little bit of a hypocrite here, because I have an anecdote in which I did not adhere to this belief, but I do believe that it is better to know the truth than to be comforted. Because I believe that the more true things we know, the better off we will live. However, I think that ignorance can be bliss. You're not the only one cursed with knowledge. No, but just like, for example, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast or even just to you guys before, but a few years ago, must have been like 2019. My great grandmother was still alive, and this was somebody who basically raised me since I was very young, as like basically a second mother to me. And they are Catholic. This is where I was when I was a Catholic. This is where I got my Catholicism from, is because my great grandparents were Catholic, and so everybody from then on was Catholic. So I went to Catholic school. But by this time, a few years ago, I was no longer Catholic. No, I had left all of that back behind me. But my great grandfather had already passed away, and my great grandmother was in declining health. And I was in Rome. I was in the Vatican City, and I had just finished seeing the St. Peter's Basilica, and it was great. It's beautiful. It's amazing what a lot of religious money can buy. I bought a rosary in the little gift shop area to give to my great grandmother, despite the fact that I don't believe any of that for a second. But she didn't know that. It's kind of like the San Manuel Bueno story, like I didn't tell her that I didn't believe any of that because I know that it would break her heart, and she is very close to me. And in this instance, I basically chose to conceal the truth to make somebody else feel good. And, here I am at this very same breath telling you that you should say, fuck that. We're going to, go for what's true. And I remember calling my great grandmother and telling her that I was outside of the Vatican, and she was so happy. She's crying on the phone. And, when my great grandmother died, she was buried holding that rosary that I bought for her at the Vatican. And so, it's a little bit of an emotional story, but like, I don't know, it feels like a very personal decision that I made, and it feels like it was the right decision. But again, at the same time, here I am telling people that we should not grant these comforts to people because these stories are not true. So I don't know.
I would like to comment briefly on your story, Bray. Just briefly.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm disappointed you didn't get me one. So, like, you should not feel bad. You should not feel bad. Like, if you got me a rosary from the actual Vatican, I'd wear it every day. I don't care. You know what I mean? It would just become like jewelry. But what I'm trying to say is that is such a culturally significant thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
If someone offered me a trip to the Vatican, totally paid for, but it's literally you just go to the Vatican, I'd say, well, yeah, hell yeah, of course I'm going.
Well, sure, yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, just because your family member had a different connection than you did, that's one thing or the other. That's fine. That's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, then perhaps there's something to be said about some limit of tolerance for existing conditions versus the proliferation of those same conditions. Like I have
exactly the Vatican, obviously, as I've just to a museum.
Yeah, like I've obviously just confessed to tolerating religious conditions, but I would be the first to step up and say, I do not want this to continue. Well, if somebody was like, "Oh, let's put the 10 Commandments on every classroom and the state,"
I would. So one thing I want to quote here that I think would be important to mention is a friend of the podcast. I suppose I shouldn't say his name, but he recently said that he was a Protestant atheist, and everyone's like, "Well, what's a Protestant atheist?" He goes, "Or what does that mean?" He goes, "It means that he's not a Catholic atheist."
Right.
But essentially, like, you from that philosophical upbringing of Protestantism, and then from that, but you're also an atheist, but you understand the context of your mindset that you exist in, the space that you're from. So it's from that when I say the following, uh, that when I speak of narrative and whether or not you're a Christian, I speak of something you have to you do on a deeply individual level. This is a deeply individual thing. My father bought me a rosary from the Vatican. Believe it or not, that's kind of a funny thing, and it kind of created a revival of Catholicism in me for a couple of years. I would do my rosary. I learned how to do it, but when I was yeah. All of this to say, though, is I'm not speaking, when I speak of this discussion, when we have it, when I'm not straw manning or trying to steel man anything, and I'm just having this discussion with you and how I feel about this topic, I would say that I'm not speaking of anything that gets into anyone else's life. Everyone else is free to do whatever it is they want to do in their lives, obviously. And I wouldn't have it any other way. It's deeply individual. This is something you need to do. This is the decision you need to make. When I speak of this, and the reason why I brought this up is I want to talk to Ayan Hirsi Ali herself. This is something she decides to do. This is something that I decide to do. This is something that you're deciding every day. Much like Kierkegaard, when he decides to be a Christian every day, it's something that's a daily process, a diving into faith. The same thing needs to be done for everyone. It's a deeply individual thing. I speak to you, Bray. I don't see any qualms with treating someone on their own level as a Muslim or as a Christian. It's up to you. It's in your own life. It is up to you. All I would say is when you're there in the massive dark and alone with yourself and in the silence of your own room, it's that person that I'm speaking to. It's that person where I ask, are you Christian? Are you not? What are you? What are you? And that is what I'm touching on here. I don't care. I don't care about society. Destroy it. No, I'm just being funny into that one. But I would say that's not
That's
what.
the first clip going out on the socials right there. I don't care about society. Destroy it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that end of fucking Monsters Inc., where he's like, I would kill 1,000 children to keep this.
I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die.
Yeah.
See, and then they want to complain.
My point, okay, like the Pixar universe is just as valid as all the other religions.
Right.
I'm telling you.
Yeah. They're wondering why all these kids don't want to work today and why they're so progressive and left wing. I'm like, well, the villains were always corporate fuckheads in all of the movies that I watched.
Genuine
shit. It's funny. I talked to my dad the other day, and he says most of the problems in the United States today are due to hippies from the 1960s, and it's due to stuff like that, which is funny, and it made me think for a second, because it creates the like from that perspective, it was the hippies point. It was the hippies being interjected into society that villainized and created these villains of like the corporate masters and all that, and that visualization that creates the system that we exist in today, like leftist philosophy and all that.
I would agree. I would agree totally with your father, except that I would say that most of those hippies became Jesus freaks, and that's what happened. I mean,
it happened very often. Yes, yeah.
The cult that I was part of. Now that I'm an educated adult, I know exactly where it came from. It came from the Pentecostal revival bullshit that happened in the the 70s and so on. Like that's literally where it came from. The cult leaders that I was, in very close contact with, they're my fucking family members. Always had a narrative of being special or being like individual, like Trevor was saying, or being unique. And there's nothing unique about them. One particular cult leader, that I was still in contact with about 5 years ago, like eventually told me a lot of his beliefs, still trying to groom me into that lifestyle, but I was getting farther and farther away from it. He told me what he believed in, and it took everything in me to tell him, "Hey, bud, you're a Muslim. You literally believe what they believe." He would never agree to that, but like he literally had all of their beliefs. It's just like, okay, so you think you have something unique here, and it's totally non-unique. Like, and so warped had become his brain that he had a very Christian fundamentalist attitude, but then like truly believed like a Muslim. It was very strange. It's always strange.
Yeah, that sense of fatalism. I usually hear that's like the main distinguishing element of like a Muslim compared to like a Christian. There's sort of a fatalism about things that's more unique. Yeah, so let's coming back to the topic at hand, talking strictly about like the need of doctrine and philosophy. I think what a lot of people see, today, and the reason why they have these thoughts, where they try to, uh, where they see this problem, is with things such as nihilism, the nihilism and the emptiness, and the sense of a vacuum, and the sense of a need to fill it, that is, you sense the meaning. You sense a. I'm trying to perfectly innovate this perspective again, a different perspective, but that's what I'm currently trying to do. You see this emptiness, this absolute meaninglessness of the universe. You were raised with the belief of God, let's say, or not. Let's say you were, and then suddenly it's gone. The carpet is pulled out from underneath your feet, and then it's from that empty space where even the silence is insufferable, where everything makes no sense, and everything is so confusing and terrifying that you feel the need to fill that gap, and it's that sense of a dire of dread that leads to, uh, well, someone diving into this sort of, I guess you could say, dangerous philosophies, such as like those of the 20th century with Nazism or communism or anything else, a sense to fill that gap. And it's the sense of a need to fill that gap that I think Ayaan Hirsi Ali herself is most in fear of. And also especially one of the biggest reasons why I disagree with him today, Jordan Peterson, who comes from a pretty atheistic tone overall, but comes out and goes, well, you should insert thing about faith and we need Christianity and we need this doctrine in order to survive and not have that empty space. These people, they remind me almost like someone like holding on so tight to the chair or to the wall to make sure that they don't fall. Like they're holding on to something as tight as they can because they know if they let go, something horrible will happen. You could see it in their eyes. You could see it in the tired, desperate expression on the face of that guy. Yes, Jordan Peterson, like for example, you could see it in his eyes. There's this gripping. If I let go, something really horrible is going to happen. And what I think is strange about that perspective is if they did let go for just a second, they would realize that it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine.
We need to get another Pixar moment in here with Dory saying, "We need to let go."
It reminds me of that meme, actually. I think I sent it through once of like two different images. One's like, what's his name from, what's the guy with the mustache? He's like a superhero, but he's actually a super villain. He's like an anime guy. I forget his name. Fuck. It's like the dad, like he beats up his son. It's like this TV show. Yeah, Omni-Man. So there's the first picture is Omni-Man beating the shit out of his son. And then like Omni-Man, it says nothingness. Like Omni-Man is nothingness in this picture. And then like the son getting the shit beat out of him is philosophers. And then below that on the second image, it's Omni-Man raising his son as a baby and the baby's having a great time. Then it says nothingness, also nothingness is Omni-Man. And the little baby is Eastern philosophers versus Western philosophers on top. And that's the difference there. So, I mean to say that there's nothing wrong with nothingness. If you let go of your dire terror, you realize that you're perfectly fine.
I couldn't agree more. And so, like, on my little note here, I have a thought that I would like to share with everybody. Nihilism as a response is almost certainly, in my mind, a bad idea. Okay? Nihilism as a motivator, for me, is a really, really good one. I realize that a clinic needs to be built instead of a church, or a synagogue, or a temple, or whatever. I realize that we need to we need to put money into this, that, or the other program that helps our fellow creatures, and not destroy land for another televangelist megachurch, or insert whatever you like when as it comes to doctrine or ideologies. What I mean to say is, I know that this is my only chance to do the right thing. That's what I'm going to do. And we can talk about what is the right thing, of course, but what I mean to say is, this is my one chance to not harm anybody. This is my one chance to help others.
Mm-hmm.
It's my only chance to be here and conscious, and I have to make the most of it.
Yes, I can very, very quickly sympathize with that. Yes, I absolutely agree. But I think the real meta to all of this, the real thing that undergirds all of the things that you said, and I think is most important about all this, is at the end of the day, or at the very beginning of the day, before any of that can start, where I do the right thing, that sort of thing. What's most difficult here and now in this century is that you have to realize that it's you, Stephen, you listener, that ordains what the right thing is. You realize that there is no exterior Godhead telling you what to do. You will say, I need to do the right thing. But before you say that, and this is quite terrifying, this is where the fear and trembling comes from. You, with all of your power and will, have to ordain and say, I have decided that this is the right thing. It's a decision that ends with you. Your infantility is ended. You're an adult now. You are become man, if you want to be biblical about it, or in that Oppenheimer phraseology. You are an adult. You've entered into adulthood, finally. The human consciousness has, I suppose, if you want to be super consciousness stuff about it. You have become an adult now. You no longer can hand it over to your father. There is no father. There never was a father. And at that moment, you have to decide for yourself, what is moral? It's moral because I decided it was. And that's where it ends. And that's the ultimate answer to all of this. You have to realize that you yourself, after killing God, like what happened in the Gay Science, Nietzsche, do we have to become gods, he asked, to become worthy of killing him? We've killed God. What do we do now? He's essentially is welcoming you to become worthy of killing God. He's dead now. Now it is your turn. You, each individual person on a deeply individual basis, has to realize the fact that you are the one that makes these decisions. And you are going to have to make these decisions. As scary as that is, as much as your arms tremble, all of that, there's no longer anything holding you up anymore. There's no longer someone listening. It's you. And it's your declarations.
No,
there is no scaffolding. It is only you are become the universe. Everything is dependent upon you. And that's a lot of weight to carry, but it's yours to carry in this life. Before it's over, it's yours to carry. The entire weight, the entire boulder is yours. There is no God who will carry most of it for you or waits for you at the top. You wait at the top. You push it from the bottom. It's all yours. And I think that is what terrifies most people. And I think that
for sure
is what this ultimate question is, of whether or not you need a doctrine.
I'd like to
you need something to carry the weight. Please.
I'd like to respond to that fear in a very good way. Once again, nihilism as a response seems to be like a one-way ticket to suicide. Nihilism as a motivator is powerful. Okay? So we're talking about all this fear, right? And I would like to just take the reverse of that. I would like to say, well, I happen to know, and you two happen to know, that let's say that Bray, you received a thoughtful gift from me tomorrow. Let's say that Bray was talking about how they've been struggling about this, that, or the other, and I send them a thoughtful gift or a tool even to help them through this troubling time. Bray knows me, and he knows that I did that of my own accord. I did not have to look in some holy book. to have guidance. I did not have to consult a deity to see if that was a good idea. I did it. That's how we should be thinking about it. That's how you get over this fear that Trevor's talking about, dear listener. If you're struggling with these thoughts, please hear me. You have to understand that letting go of those, ideas are liberating. They're not terrifying, they're liberating. Once again, you have no sadomasochistic deity telling you to punish anyone or to help anyone. You get to do that on your own. And that's the good part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what was the quote I was just sharing again in the quotes channel the other day? The Jean-Paul Sartre quote: "Man is condemned to be free because once thrown in the world, he is responsible for all he does." Man, that is a good quote. You know, this kind of thrusts us back into the very beginning of when I first started thinking about this question. Was like, quite literally, does morality require a doctrine? And I guess part of what we've been talking about is really more in the vein, or at least towards the part of the episode we're at now, is really more of, does existence require a narrative? But does morality require a doctrine? When I tried to think of what the answer to no would be, I was immediately drawn to, something like a moral intuitionist or something, which we didn't really, I don't think, discuss very much, and at least at our college philosophy program. When we talk about moral philosophy, is typically your classics and your objective or subjective morality, et cetera, et cetera. There was no real discussion of intuitive morals, and I don't even really know that much about that. But that's almost kind of like what it feels like we're dancing around. It's like, well, you have to figure this out for yourself. Like, you've got to sort of intuit and discover these things for yourself. But the thing about that is that
I disagree.
Yeah, go ahead, because I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not trying to defend that or anything. I'm just saying.
Well, yeah. So, I know you're not. By the way, I don't think that humans have good intuition for hardly anything. Right.
Right.
We have given, and when I say this, I don't mean in a design way, but our species has given up a great many of its instincts for our higher learning and so on. We know that. We know that well. To invite Christopher Hitchens back into the conversation, as well we should, Bray. Just as an affirming reminder to you that that's not true at all. We don't have to intuit everything. We simply don't. In fact, it's preferable if we don't. Literature and philosophy can teach us. How can it teach us? Why can it teach us? Well, we learn from the dead. We get to speak to the dead. They don't get to speak back except by the unalterable words that they have given us. But you guys get what I mean. We don't have to reinvent the wheel any more than we absolutely have to. Every human has to kind of reinvent the wheel in that aspect, on a small scale. But on the big scale, our species has made great strides. We are not alone, and we simply don't have to be alone to do this sort of thing. It's an individual exercise, like Trevor has suggested, for certain, but it's like we're having a monologue, a kind of dialogue with ourself, and we're teaching ourselves the words of those who have already made these mistakes. I killed this person, and I feel really bad about it. I destroyed this person's property, and this was the consequence. As it goes on, we literally get to talk to the dead about it.
This is what that's exactly where I would have gone with that. So thank you for that. I would say now, going back to the other side of the question, Trevor, does morality require a doctrine? Obviously, it doesn't require a doctrine, but if we want to get anywhere, then we may well benefit from a doctrine, not a dogma. I'll be very specific about that. When we talk about something like Christianity, those moral laws and moral commandments were written and have been and are not supposed to be up for interpretation, at least not in the way that it has been construed in countless numbers of ways, leading to the number of denominations that we have in this world. But you know, we have a much more malleable, just as Stephen was saying, we have years and years and years of people going through lives just like we are going through right now, and people discovering things like, oh, well, it's probably not a good idea for me to go around just whacking whoever I want, or it's probably not a good idea for me to burn down so and so's property, or do whatever. And so this is how we discover things about our world. And I think that there's benefit in a doctrine of morality that is based on these discoveries that we have made, which is why I always end up parroting that phrase, like, well, we live in a physical universe, a physical world that is made and dictated by physical laws. And, you know, if we're going to share this planet and share resources, it only makes sense that we would want to take care of each other, because the people who did not choose to take care of each other are no longer here because of natural selection in a roundabout way. And that is yet another discovery that we have made. So perhaps it is beneficial for morality to have a doctrine. Not necessary, but like I just said, perhaps it's beneficial to us that it is doctrinal, but not dogmatic. Yeah.
Dogma or doctrine, whatever you call it. One thing I wanted to texture this with is kind of a difficulty that I see like today with some religious philosophies. Just the other day, I saw like a really short, like a YouTube Shorts clip, like only a minute long, talking about, it was like a very there are a lot of like Islamic YouTube Shorts nowadays. If you scroll through, I don't know if I'm being targeted. I don't know, but I get like a lot of like very pro,
I'm being targeted by the Islamic TikTok,
I guess. But they're really interesting. I actually find them really interesting. I actually enjoy watching them just so I can better understand. And one of the things that comes up is that I saw that was a bit weird was this discussion of, well, actually, Islam is, if it wasn't for Islam, there would be no rights for women. It's actually quite feminist Islam. And then it talks about how, well, before Islam, like the Roman.
Oh,
let me explain. And this is how I'll approach it. Before Islam, what you have is like both in Rome, in the Roman Empire, as well as the Persian Empire, women couldn't even stand in court, you know, that sort of thing. And Islam introduced a system where they could. I mean, you needed like 3 of them against 1 man, so it's not like, you know. But that kind of comes to what I'm about to say. But you now can have that, and like there are divorce laws now in Islam. In fact, a lot of divorce laws today are derived from Islamic the introduction of Islamic philosophy and Islamic law into Europe. Before that, if like a man divorced his wife or whatever else, there would be nothing. And so listed all these reasons. Well, actually, Islam is actually quite great when it comes to in terms of like feminism and rights for women. But then it comes to this point. Dogma is terrible because it has no way of being edited or changing.
right.
It needs to evolve necessarily. Let's just say, and I believe it is true, that Islam, it was considerably better to be a woman and insert this caliphate over insert this Christian kingdom during the year 1200. I believe that that's probably true. I actually think like it was overall better. Like you could actually, you know, you couldn't vote, but you could participate in the judiciary. You could do this, you could do that. You could actually own property, and in some Islamic caliphates, compared to you couldn't possibly do so in most parts of Europe as a woman. However, and this comes to it, well, they all got kind of left by the wayside, didn't they? They didn't change. They didn't change and edit accordingly as they needed to. They're incapable of fitting and riveting into the overarching narrative and actually moving forward. And actually moving towards what the goalpost is.
That's because the Quran is the final word of
exactly.
a deity.
It's the recitation. It's perfect, and when it's perfect, it can't change. It can break, but it cannot bend, and that's the fundamental issue. And that's another quote by Hitchens.
And this is what
break,
I think is,
but it cannot bend.
it is so funny about this stuff and this is why I busted out laughing in there, because it reminded me of comment sections that I've seen of people trying to say that Islam is not prejudiced against women or something, and they will go to an example like, yeah, women are actually allowed to drive now. And
great.
and I'm like, oh, well, we're making great strides then. And it's that kind of thing that you just said about, like Stephen said, the unalterable word of God, and you were talking about, it's the problem with dogmas. It's uneditable. It's like, how would you have ever even figured out that a woman should be allowed to drive? There were no automobiles around when supposedly this revelation occurred. They would not appear for quite some time. So this means that somewhere down the line, some religious figure who, in a roundabout way, is no different than any other person on the planet, somebody just up and decided one day that this was okay. Like this, God willing, let the women drive. And I think that really just goes to show you that the problems with dogma, because if anybody out there thinks that their religion has not fundamentally changed since its inception, you are grossly mistaken. And that is one of the things that I even mentioned this in the God chat in the Discord not too long ago. I was like, this is what really surprises me about how people believe this stuff, is because it has changed so much since its inception. Like, what you are meant to believe, I would imagine, is exactly what was revealed to the prophets or whoever, the prophets, the people who received this good news that they want to pass on to everyone else. You should be believing that. However, it is us human beings who have altered that so many times throughout history to fit the current need of the people. And that is now like, it's not like God came down every time and was like, oh, we got to make a change here. Oh, we got to make a change here. It's just people saying, oh, well, we got to let the women drive now because this is really destroying our economic infrastructure.
I'm trying to remember exactly where that came from. There are a lot of things. So, oh man, I really don't want to misquote the Quran right now over an episode. I'd rather do it when I'm not being recorded. But if I remember, oh man, I'm gonna have to go check this later. Do not take this as a fact. Go look it up. If I remember correctly, it's written somewhere in the Quran that women, or at the very least within like the general Islamic philosophy before the cars and all that, is that women can't ride on horseback except in a time of war, and that leads to women can't drive cars. Like it's like a thing that leads to this. Like that's essentially, and that's basically why women can't drive cars in Saudi Arabia. That's basically where that comes from.
And you're exactly right. That's literally just some dude sitting down going, well, I think this says this, so we're going to go with that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, God didn't say anything about automobiles.
He did.
Just like God never said anything about...
Their fatwas and their hadith references and their Quran references are endless, overlapping, and contradictory.
Well, what's interesting about the Quran, it's really quite better in that regard to Christianity in this regard, because it's much better at not having contradictions, because it was written by just one dude, essentially.
All it takes is one. And he plagiarized most of that.
You're right. I'm not going to disagree with you because you're right. But I am going to say that the Bible is a library. That's a common phrase, because it is. It's written by many different people over many points in time. Therefore, it's full of things that contradict one another. The Quran was written by one person. That doesn't mean that it's contradictory proof, because it does have contradictions. But it does mean that it's considerably better at not having contradictions over everything in Christianity. And that's one of the reasons why it's so absolutely, not airtight, but so much tighter in terms of being circumvented and attacked over like Christianity, let's say.
Then why is Ali a Christian?
Yeah, really. But so, Trevor, I don't.
Yeah, well, it's not good for society.
I don't want you to think that I disagree with you, because I know of the two in general that Islam is what exactly as you say, but we must absolutely keep in mind that Islam is the younger religion, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why it hasn't suffered as much of these fates that are logical. As the religion spreads to more and more kinds of people, the more and more it must and will diversify and
And then
contradict
break.
itself. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, there are actually religious sects of Islam that are already fractured and splitting today, and then splitting more. Like everyone knows about the Sunnis and the Shias, and maybe the Sufis within the Sunnis. But I mean, that's after that cursory glance. There's actually many different sub-varieties of Shia. There are many sub-varieties of those very
Exactly.
particular Shia. It actually is
Mhm.
quite split and splintered in that way. And you know,
Right.
one thing that's really interesting about Islam, again, that's really interesting, is I believe it was their third caliph. Like they have like the four rightly guided caliphs. I believe it was the third caliph, Uthman, who like went out and assembled and actually created the first written or the first like official Quran. Before that, it was mostly recited aloud by people who were around the Muhammad for his lifetime, and finally had it written. And during that time, he also got all the various versions of the Quran together into one place and had one guy write it and go, hey, you're the specialist, you write it. And when that one was written, had all of the other ones destroyed completely. Burn, 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 burn. Had all of them destroyed. Put a neat bow on the whole thing. And one of them, and
Arbitrarily.
is one of the, arbitrarily. And is one of the reasons why people say that the Quran is the perfect book, because there are no perturbations. It's been the same book since the original writing. Well, that's because all the other perturbations of it have been destroyed quite
Mhm.
quickly. While Christianity, on the other hand,
Right.
specifically like the Gospels, it's kind of scary. Whenever you go really far back, the New Testaments, there are so many differences between them. Like specifically, like there are like John. There are many different differences amongst the Johns in like early Christian history. Now it becomes quite solid later, like for 1,000 or so years, it becomes essentially just John. But if the whole thing is based on like the tree trunk, like the root at which it's all based is from a very disparate, many different versions of John, and also all the other different Gospels. It throws the entire thing into flesh. The realization that you could be reading something that's fundamentally wrong, not canon. The canon could be not canon, and
Mhm.
that could be a serious issue. Islam solved that quite easily.
And this is
There's
what I
one.
mean by all it takes is one person to look at those and say, I think I could improve this a little bit. And
Mm,
suddenly you have an entirely new sect, denomination, whatever. And you are that much further from figuring out what is actually true,
mm,
which is what is actually useful.
mm. Well, we might want to leave there. 1717. I don't know if we have time, but that's kind of critical there when you say if something is true because it is useful.
Something is useful because it is true.
Something is useful because it is true. And very often, it's a
Yes.
good way to go by it. I wouldn't
Often
say all the
enough.
time. Something is,
I
yeah.
don't want to dwell or harp on your position again, Trevor, but
Please.
I feel compelled to do so. Um, you said you said that Islam easily rectified like the holy book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know what you mean, but I feel compelled to say that it took a lot of human death to do so.
Oh well, yes. Oh well, most certainly, most certainly.
Right.
And
I
I'm
mean,
also specifically
yeah,
speaking of the issue of having many different Qurans and solving that
yeah.
problem
So I
was
mean,
quite easy.
we all know
But I'm
the
not speaking of all of Islam. Yeah.
yeah, we all know the stories. Like they took together so many little myths and little stories, all of which were couched in local metaphors, intensely local struggles. They were brought together, and most of it was dismissed, and then like the final unalterable Quran was made out of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
crucible. That too is a myth. Why was this myth not okay and this one was? Well, it's because this powerful individual said so, and so he has been deified, and so he has been lifted up beyond human status. He has an authority that others do not, and so on. But it took a lot of human death to convince people that he was right, and it took a lot of human death to make um, Christianity the powerhouse of an ideology that it was and is gasping to be again.
Speaking of Islam, I've just gotten a headline that more than 1,300 people have died during this year's Hajj pilgrimage.
Oh, yeah, the heat waves. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty bad in India, too. It's pretty heinous right now. Well, with that, be sure to
drink lots of water.
Drink lots of water, and don't forget to reduce, reuse, and recycle. Holy fuck. Yeah, make sure you switch out that plastic straw. Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Have y'all seen? Yeah, please. Yeah.
So forgive me, listener. We have had a few connection problems. If I seem out of phase with the other two or interrupting more than other episodes, you bear that in mind. But my closing remarks would be from two sources. Okay. Number one, everyone on this panel, everyone in this show with you right now would agree with what I'm about to say. Go home and play with your toys. Pick up your toys, hug them, they comfort you or whatever. But you must not suppose that everyone has the same toys. I currently abide in a state that has decided that everyone will play with the same toys, whether you like it or not. And there are big lawsuits about it, this, that, and the other. So, by all means, if you want to believe in this gibberish, I would not stop you. I would be the last person to stop you. But if you ever ask me about it, I'm going to tell you what you believe in is ruining your mind. And so, I want to address what Trevor said earlier as well. He's totally and completely right about that fear, about that pernicious fear that there shall be nothing and so on. Well, from this one, I'm pretty sure I get it from Twain, Mark Twain. Once again, philosophy and literature can save us in this regard. Twain had the thought that he was not conscious before he was born, and he will not be conscious thereafter, after he dies. In other words, he will, in a way, return to a state in which, he's not conscious. He's literally not there. So who cares? You will return to the state you were before you were born. And there's nothing you can do about it. Once again, do your best now and take care of each other.
Yes.
Ray, you got any last?
Probably not. Just peace, love, unity, and respect. And it's never too late to look up the eco-terrorism Wikipedia page.
All right, that's a way to end. All right. With that, I guess my outro would be a phrase that I live by, I suppose. Whatever it comes down to, whatever it is you're doing, there's one thing to bear in mind whenever you live. That's become who you are. That's all. Become who you are. And with that, I think we can end. This has been Four Mortal Coils, episode 25. Leave some comments down below.
Hey, thought of something funnier than 24.
You son of a bitch.
What about? Okay, we had to get that in there at some point.
Yep, this has been episode 25. Signing off. I shall see y'all next week. Goodbye.